Welcome to Thrive Talking, the podcast that asks how can psychology help minds to thrive and what else helps. We are joined today by Sharon from Kings Clear Counselling in Hampshire to explore the topic of the parenting juggle. We're going to be looking at how neurotypes may affect what works and what doesn't, and we will be informed by knowledge and insights from psychological research, from clinical practice, and from lived experience. And of course, we will be asking, what else?
So, Sharon, do you want to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about who you are and your interests?
Yeah, thanks, Georgina. So my name is Sharon May. I run a multi-therapist counselling practice in Hampshire, and I work as a counselling psychotherapist with lots of individuals with various problems. I don't specifically have a niche as such, but a lot of the clients that I tend to work with exhibit some type of neurodiversity, and so we are working with the sort of emotional struggles that come with that, or it's just working in a way that suits them with whatever issue they've presented with. I'm also a researcher, so I am currently studying mental health in agriculture as part of a Nuffield International Farming Scholarship, which is very exciting. And I'm also a wife and mother to 3 children.
Thank you, Sharon. So many fascinating things there, and such a busy lady. We really appreciate you fitting us in today. Thank you. There are so many things that we could talk about, Sharon, and I think the Nuffield Scholarship and the mental health in agriculture is going to be another one, if you wouldn't mind.
Not at all.
But right now, and I think this is probably my bias also as a mother of 3, I was particularly struck by the parenting juggle, particularly through that lens of neurodiversity. And I just wondered if you could share some of your experience with us.
Yeah, okay. So I think there's a lot to talk about there. I think we're recording this literally the week before Christmas. I think it's the 18th. And this time of year I'm finding particularly challenging, and I know a lot of families do. There's so much going on. There's so many things to juggle, so many things to remember, so many plates spinning. A lot of it is overwhelming, and everyone is kind of running on empty a little bit and is depleted. And I think that's when kind of things tend to sort of bubble up and conflicts happen, and kind of people get pushed over the edge in terms of sort of emotional regulation and things like that. So it's really difficult as a parent and professional and human being just to manage all that sometimes.
Yes, I think we're all hanging in there for Friday, and then it's the break for Christmas, isn't it? And I think across the neurotypes, this is a season that we can both love but also really struggle with.
I think for me, structure and routine are really important. Like, I really cling to them. They're my safety, as is sort of feeling in control somehow, and all of that goes out the window at this time of year, because there's no structure, there's no routine, and so then I feel like I've got a sort of less than stable base to manage everyone else from, and it's very easy to feel like you're losing the plot sometimes.
Sharon, you make some really important points there, and I think, can I ask about your own neurotype and how you would identify yourself?
Yeah, so this is a really interesting topic for me. So I guess, despite having worked with neurodiversity in a professional sense, I think probably my own exploration of my own neurodiversity probably only started maybe 4 or 5 years ago, when I started to do more research, do more reading, do more exploration, sit with more people whose struggles felt really familiar, to the point where I started to think, oh, actually, maybe there's a reason I'm identifying with these people quite so strongly, and there's a reason why the familiar is there. And so I began to sort of go down a rabbit hole, as I ever want to do, hyper focus, and find out more about it. And as a consequence, I suspected that I was autistic. I was also getting quite a lot of familiarity with the ADHD sort of profiles as well. And so I think I started to believe that might be applicable to me, but had that sort of slightly typical thing of, when I said it to people, getting, you're not you're not autistic, you don't come across as autistic. But of course that was part of the thing, is that I've been masking so effectively for so long, that of course I don't, because that's the stuff that's all the internal struggle. And I think I hit perimenopause as well. I had to have a medical hysterectomy 3 years ago, and so that, as we know, can sort of exacerbate some of the presentation of symptoms and things. And so I started the diagnosis process, and I went through to the point of I've had the sort of 2-3 hour interview with the clinical psychologist. I've done all the screening questionnaires, all that sort of thing, which highlight that I am in all likelihood autistic and potentially ADHD as well. But I have stopped short at the moment of going through the rest of the diagnosis process, because I'm wrestling very much on why I'm doing it. Plus, there's barriers like cost and time, and things like parental interviews. My mum's no longer with us, and stuff like that. So there's all these kind of things that I've kind of been trying to understand what going through that process would give me, what it would cost me, that sort of thing. And I think for me it was a big validation piece. So just kind of got to the stage I've got to, and having someone go, no, this isn't you making it up, this is kind of, there is a reason for you to be thinking this, and there is a reason to go through that process, was actually enough for me at that point. And then at some point I think I'm probably going to go down the sort of more definite route, but right now it's not quite the right time. And I think it's okay to kind of, for me anyway, to pause and just go, actually, that's on the to-do list, but it doesn't have to be done right now.
I was really struck by, when you were talking there, a couple of things. One of them was like, I suppose, what I would call the journey of discovery. And when I've spoken with people and witnessed things sort of in my family life as well as elsewhere, it hasn't been a sort of a switch as to like, oh, you're autistic, or oh, you're ADHD. It's a slow uncovering of something. And I think that can be sort of a cognitive process, a sort of thinking process of putting things into place, but also a very emotional process as well. And that kind of leads into the other thing that stood out for me there, something about identity, a sort of shift in identity of that a diagnosis doesn't really change anything in a pragmatic sort of way, but in our relationship with ourselves, what then happens for better and worse in the relationship.
I think for me, identity is the key. And I think identity and curiosity are the two words that kind of really hit home with this process, because it wasn't kind of me clinging to a life raft of understanding so much as just another possible explanation to help me make sense of some of the things that I found really difficult. And I think the shift that comes with the identity, for so long you've been believing certain things about yourself because that's what's been reflected back to you by others, and then to suddenly go, oh, actually what it might be is something slightly different, and the internal kind of shifting that needs to happen to let that settle at each phase, I think, because it isn't just oh, it's gone from this to this. It's kind of everything kind of moves, because it's the fundamentals that you've built your life and your personality and your identity on, and to suddenly find that they're not quite what you've been led to believe, but actually somehow more in line with what you thought, is a really kind of big thing to get your head around. And that's why I think there's, for those of us who are coming to that sort of realization and that curiosity later in life, it's okay to take that slowly, because it's a lot to process, and it is, it is a lot to kind of come to terms with and make sense of. And there's still stigma around the words, and there's still stigma around the idea, and like I said, when you finally get to the point where you're almost certain enough to believe it yourself, but then you mention it to someone else and you get a reaction to that's not quite in line either. It's really complicated.
I was going to say, one of the phrases I've heard is about somebody else is saying, "Oh, well, there's nothing wrong with them," or an autistic person. I was like, "No, they're correct. There is nothing wrong with them, but there's a different wiring, and it's quite helpful to understand what that different wiring means."
And I think I've had some people sort of be slightly baffled as to why I've gone down the route of finding out, in terms of, well, why would you want to put yourself in that box? And for me, diagnosis is never about reducing someone to a label. It's always about expanding rather than reducing. It's about expanding understanding. And for me, a lot of it was about validation of, for example, you know, that feeling of never quite fitting in, never quite knowing what the rules were, or never quite getting it right, you know, that kind of thing. Of internally, the belief I constructed was that there's something wrong with me. Exactly that. I just can't get it right. No matter how hard I try, I must try harder, because whatever I do is never quite good enough, or I'm never quite getting it right. So I must do better, try harder, push through, you know, all that sort of stuff. And actually just to go, no, it's just something that you find really difficult. It's like, oh, okay, well, that's different. That sits very differently within me. I mean, nothing changes, but it just sits differently.
Doesn't it though? Because what about your relationship with yourself there? Does that not shift and change a little bit?
I think it's allowed me to be much kinder to myself, because I think if you asked the people around me, number one, they'd think you're nuts, because they'd be like, well, she always seems like fine, like she's really high achieving, you know, got straight A's at school, made it look easy, does so many things, you know, never seems to struggle socially, because it's all internal. And no one ever understands how hard I've probably pushed myself in terms of social situations or academically. Like, I know I made it look easy on the outside, but beneath the surface, I'm frantically paddling like a mad thing, and no one kind of saw that, because that's part of how I survived. And so that kind of, just it sits differently. You're kinder to yourself when you go, actually, it's not your fault that you can't do this. It's just, it's hard, and actually these are the strategies you need. And it's not a big change, but it's just a kinder change.
What I'm hearing is that irrespective of having a diagnostic label, your recognition of your own neurodivergence has actually been tremendously helpful in you demonstrating more compassion and understanding to yourself. And I think when we're looking at diagnosing adults, I think it's that's so valuable. Now, Ruth, you were saying earlier that it doesn't make a pragmatic difference having a diagnosis. It does when it comes to children. It very much does. When you've got a severely autistic child, for example, those diagnoses can really help to get support. And I think when we're adults, it still can help in terms of talking through adaptations that can be helpful for you in a workplace. But you mentioned, Sharon, you know, we don't live in a fluffy world. It can be really difficult for people, irrespective of whether they've got the diagnosis or not, to share it with others. And people's reactions can be quite surprising.
Yeah, and I think, you know, I'm not at school. I'm not asking for medical provision. I don't think I'd want to personally go down the medication route. That doesn't feel like what I'd need anyway. So one of my hesitations about sort of continuing with the process is actually, what would a diagnosis give me? Like, is there a reason to go any further down, or is it just enough to know? And you know, do I need that external validation? Do I need a bit of paper? Which is, you know, one of my drivers. Am I challenging that a little bit? But I think you're right. For kids who need, or well, anyone actually, adults who need provision, whether that's in the workplace, you know, I'm self-employed, I don't need to tell my boss, you know, it's that sort of stuff. But for those people that do need support, whether that's at school or in the workplace or with study or with life adaptation or whatever, or they would benefit from medication. Absolutely, you kind of need that step because that's how our society works. That's how our system works, for understandable reasons completely. But it is more nuanced, I think, when you don't have those reasons to do it.
Yeah, I'm really curious about the journey of parenting as a neurodivergent person. So, for example, for me, I have a severely autistic son, and it was his journey and experience that led me to recognize more of the neurodiversity within myself and my wider family. And I'm curious about your reflections on parenting as a neurodivergent person.
Well, I think actually the very first thing that made me curious about neurodiversity was when I was doing my counselling training 10 years ago, 12 years ago, somewhere around there. The therapist I was seeing as part of my training, I remember talking to her about, I suspected that my mum might have been autistic, but she was born in 1944 and it was, just not on anyone's radar. But on reflection, I could see some things that made me wonder if there was an element at play there. And then I didn't really think much more of it. And then my middle daughter, a few years ago, was struggling with emotional regulation, executive functioning things, and sensory issues, that sort of stuff, which again made me sort of think, oh, maybe there's something at play here. Now it's slightly complicated for her because she was very, very unwell as a very small baby, so there's a lot of trauma. So it's very difficult to know whether some of her presentations are potentially as a result of the neurodiversity or potentially a result of the trauma that she underwent when she was very small. So that is a knot that we still have to unravel. But there was this kind of element of, well, having suspected that my mother might be autistic in the generation above me, and curious as to whether my daughter might be autistic in the generation below me, there's probably only one line between those two. But I think, it's when people say, oh, there's more and more diagnoses, people are jumping on the bandwagon these days. But I think a lot of it is people recognizing now neurodiversity within children, and it's leading to conversations about, well, that's something I've always struggled with. Oh, it's kind of that element of it, isn't it? And I think that can't be underestimated.
Yeah, I think there's something really important in that, isn't there? That I suppose thinking about children of like my generation, they were the naughty kids. The what would now be sort of hyperactive ADHD would be the naughty one. The inattentive would be whatever the sort of labels. So my experience was dyslexia. I still don't have a diagnosis because they didn't do that back then, but they just sort of said, oh, you're probably dyslexic, and then off you go. That was it. That was it. There wasn't anything else around that. My parents sort of tried to help a little bit with a gadget or something, but you had to type the word in, so I couldn't spell it, so it didn't help that much. But I suppose, I think you're right. There's something about the more conversations we're having, the more people realise that autism doesn't mean either something sort of non-verbal, or it doesn't mean like a Rain Man savant, and people sort of associate, what is autism, and it's a bit of a challenge really, because the label currently spans such a wide spectrum of things. It almost kind of loses, I don't know, I don't know if it loses, but it's a challenge to say autistic and be talking about, for example, you talk about yourself going to university, getting straight A's and so on, and then we talk about Georgina's son who's non-verbal at the age of, is he 8 now? And
7.
Yeah. and has quite significant struggles. So
but I think that's
challenge.
more to do with other people's need to put the world in boxes, isn't it? And like, it's very hard for other people to accept that those two things can be similar. And and I think part of it is we're going to move towards probably different language and different definitions as time progresses. But I think, yeah, people like to know what they're getting, and so it doesn't feel comfortable when you've got sort of different presentations that all fit within the same category. But I think the more we talk about it and we encourage people to understand that there's a vast spectrum of different elements of autism,
Yes.
and all the other neurodiversities as well. My husband's dyslexic, my eldest son is dyslexic, currently curious as to where my youngest might be too, and dyspraxia and dyscalculia and all that sort of stuff that people still haven't got on their radars yet. We've I can't remember whose quote it was, but for those that get left behind, it's showing them compassion to bring them along, because actually we can't expect everyone who doesn't work in psychology to know what all these things are and to understand the full rainbow spectrum of nuance that comes with it. We've just got to gently bring them into those conversations more often so that they're more aware of that stuff, because I think they can't know it all.
I like that. There's a kindness and compassion, and it's inviting people to come and join the conversation.
Well, I think sometimes people can feel that there's a minefield, that if they use the wrong word, or autistic person versus person with autism, it's like, and people worry and then say nothing at all for fear of offending. And I think that's a mistake. And I think you're right. It's about open discussion. Now, I'm really curious about where neurodiversity hits parenting.
Oh yeah, sorry, that's what we're talking about. Yes.
So it's interesting because neurodiversity affects every area of your life, doesn't it? And that includes parenting. And so whereas at work, like, I can make adaptations for some of my challenges. My secretary can proofread my reports and will make sure that they go out nice and correct. When it comes to negotiating life as a parent, there's nobody filling in the gaps. And I was just sharing earlier, I had this moment of, so my little girl is doing cooking club after school at the moment. And for the whole term, she's been meant to take in Tupperware. We have not remembered for the entire term. And she said, "Oh, Mummy, they just keep sighing at me." And I felt horrible, because that's my fail. That's my responsibility to remember that bit of Tupperware. And to the point where I was like, I don't want to do cooking club next term because I just can't handle one more thing that I've got to remember in the morning. And yes, it was just that sense of shame and looking at all the other children. Oh, look at them with their Tupperware.
I think I went into parenting. I am really good at multitasking. I'm really good at spinning plates. I tend to be. I've worked out how to manage it, and I tend to be really good. And so I kind of went into parenting naively, as we all do, thinking I was going to be fine. And I found it a lot harder than I anticipated. And it's only kind of in the last few years where I've come to realize that certainly my kids are now 16, 14 and 10. In the early years, I was massively overstimulated, like the noise, being overtouched, really wore me out, which of course when you've got small children who need to be held all the time, or need to be or just constantly touching you, or constantly in that space, I found that really overwhelming and really difficult. And I'd get snappy, and I wouldn't like the person I became as a result, and I berated myself for it. It's a bit like what we were saying earlier. I told myself I wasn't being good enough. I told myself I over-identified with my kids, so I told myself off for that, because I could imagine how they were feeling when they were on the receiving end of me being really snappy, or, losing my rag or whatever. And so I told myself I had to do better. I had to try harder. I had to sort of work it out. And actually now I can see that I just found it really, really hard sometimes not having that space, that decompression time, that sort of stuff, which if I knew that now, I could probably, if not make it happen all the time, but ask for it more frequently, or just be nicer to myself to give it to me, to give it to myself, because I don't think I did, because that wasn't in my radar or my awareness. And so I was massively overstimulated and depleted, because I was tired and hormonal, which is always a good combination. And then, like you say, you drop the ball because it's inevitable. And then again, I'd be really hard on myself because I wasn't being good enough. And that fed into a lot of the other things that I've sort of carried with me all my life about never quite managing to get it right in terms of other people. And I couldn't even do it for my kids. And then, as I said, my daughter was quite poorly, and so some of the things that I would get back from my children would press big buttons for me, whether it was just having to repeat myself frequently. Like, that is a big button for me, because I really think carefully about my communication, and I've always been a self-editor, I suppose. And so to still think quite carefully about my communication, but either to be willingly ignored or challenged, or just constantly having to say the same thing over again, I find that really difficult. And again, it's those things that come with parenting, but with an element of neurodiversity, there's this kind of underlayer that just makes it overwhelming. And I know that all people struggle with some of those things, and there'll be people listening to this and go, well, yeah, kids are just annoying. And they are sometimes, but it creates like a visceral kind of response sometimes. And when you get competing neurodiversity traits or things that just clash, I think it can be really difficult. And my husband and me have quite different parenting styles, but also we suspect that he might be undiagnosed ADHD as well. Like, if you read a textbook, it's got his name at the bottom. But there's that element of those things clashed. So even when we're trying to co-parent a child that's struggling with their emotional regulation, our approach is very different, because I like structure and order and he likes chaos, and so the way we meet that need in that child is very different. And so there's that added element, and so there's this just big kind of chaotic melting point where you all think that you're doing it right, but actually someone else thinks you're doing it wrong, and so therefore you think you're doing it wrong, and it just gets really messy. And we survived.
So what helped you survive? What, from the world of psychology, your training, your learning, was there anything from that was helpful, or was there other stuff that came into play that helped?
I think the reading and the more knowledge I got, particularly around sort of ADHD and dyslexia, allowed me to see my husband slightly differently and realize that actually some of the things he was doing weren't personal, because that was a big thing for us, was kind of like, I'm lucky, he's a farmer, so he comes home for lunch most days, and I'd have straightened everything because order is important to me, and I'd finally got on top of the kitchen. The kitchen's the big thing for me. It's one of those things that if my kitchen is calm, I'm calm. So he'd come in for lunch and whiz out again, and he'd always leave like the milk on the side and his plate out and all the rest of it, and it would drive me absolutely potty. And we had numerous conversations of escalating severity about, can you just, when you're finished, put it away? And he never did. And I took that really personally, because I was at a point where, like, I've asked you for this thing, I've carefully thought about how I communicate it and kind of got my point across, and it's being totally ignored. So that's pushing a big button in me. But it was only kind of coming to the understanding of, oh, he actually can't, like, he can try, but he's sitting there having his lunch and his brain is already off on the next things he's doing before he's left And so he just leaves. And so he's not doing it deliberately. He's not thinking, oh, she'll get it, I can leave it for the, you know, the house slave to do. It's not that, but that's how it felt to me. And so just kind of being aware of that, and then being able to say to him, actually, I need this order in a world that is chaos. I know it's silly, but I need order in my kitchen because that helps me regulate myself. Just being able to sort of identify those needs without judgment, I think was the thing that changed our relationship, which then allowed us, as we got that understanding, to then meet the kids' needs slightly differently. Because when you're raw and vulnerable and tired and emotional, whether that's you or the kids, it's really easy to take things personally. And if you've got an element of demand avoidance or anything like that, then that adds another element, you know, when you're asking the kids to do something and they're not doing it, and it feels like that's a personal attack. It's not a personal attack. It's like they can't handle that kind of instruction, and so you have to think of a different way of doing it, and that's really frustrating to you because you just want things to happen quickly. And it's just going into it with, it's kind of almost taking that personal element out of it and just kind of attacking it from a slightly different angle, I suppose.
So lots of rich information there. So it's understanding each other's neurotype has helped to create more harmony in the household and find that compassionate perspective for yourself and the other person. But I'm also hearing about the depths that we have to dig sometimes as parents. I know those moments of, can you just put your shoes on?
Yeah.
It's exasperating, and actually freeing up those cognitive resources so that you can think about, what's another way of saying this? What's another way of saying this when you're feeling quite dysregulated yourself? It's hard, isn't it?
I think the things I'd wish I'd known, which I know now they're a bit bigger, I wish I'd understood more about self-regulation. I knew the things that helped and the things that didn't help. But things like when a small child is kicking off in the car, I find that so difficult because there's something about noise in a small space for me and not being able to escape it, because you're, you know, on the motorway or you know, you're whatever, and having to manage in those spaces I found really difficult. So I think just some of the breathing techniques or whatever that would helped me in those situations to regulate enough to get us to a space where we could handle that better would have been great. Knowing that I needed small regular decompressions, for example, would have helped me manage my day a bit differently to how maybe because I just thought I had to push on through. I just thought I was being selfish if I took that space. I didn't realize that it was actually me, sort of gas mask analogy, putting mine on before I could help the kids. You know, it was, I didn't understand any of that, and I wish I'd understood that better, that actually, you know, me stepping aside for a bit just to regulate myself was beneficial to all of us, rather than me feeling like I was somehow failing or not able to cope or being selfish in those moments. And I'd have found a way perhaps to ask for that.
I heard somebody recently talking about not just putting in the breaks, particularly over Christmas. We're recording this just before Christmas, as you said,
Yeah.
but not just putting in the breaks of, like, you know, planned for, but putting breaks in before, sort of like, okay, so we know we're going to be doing this, let's have an hour of nothing beforehand. And I thought, wow, that's
I heard a great phrase the other day that someone said, we need to start thinking of rest as preparation, not recovery. And that kind of blew my mind, because we think we have to push on until we can get a rest, right? Yeah. Particularly at Christmas. I'm aware that I'm being really hypocritical because I'm flying about like a mad thing at the moment, but actually putting rest in as preparation for big stuff is probably more useful.
Oh my goodness. Georgina, are you listening to this? So Georgina and I have had lots of chats about rest. I don't think she's very good at it. Sorry, Georgina, you're brilliant at many, many, many things, but not rest.
It's really hard. I have 3 jobs, 3 children. if I sit down just for a nanosecond, and it's usually to reply to a message on my never-ending list of messages that I need to reply to, my husband inevitably will come into the room and look at me with condemnation. Like I'm just sitting there amongst all this chaos, doing nothing. It's really hard to give yourself permission, and it can sometimes feel difficult within the system to get that permission when the system is under so much strain and there are so many things to do. It's very hard not to be a human doing, if you like, because everything that you're saying is true. If you pause and rest, you are more sustainable. You've then got more joy in your bucket, so to speak, to connect with your children in the kind of way that you want to. Otherwise, you're connecting with everybody from empty, and that's a fractious place.
Yeah. And I think I still haven't quite worked out how to manage. I go through hyperproductive, overwhelmed, burnout cycle on repeat. Like it's I'm trying to get better at it, but I still do it, and it's something that I've now learned to recognize, because when you feel good, you think you can do everything. So you do everything and then you get overwhelmed. Yeah. But I think it doesn't have to be rest as in taking a day off, and it doesn't have to be rest as in a big thing. For me, I wish I knew more about micro rest.
I call it pockets of, can you find a pocket of time? Like if Georgina was one of my clients, I would be working with her to say, okay, that is your life, that is your structure, that is your setup. And so I wouldn't be saying, oh, you need a day in a spa. Like Georgina, we've had this conversation, Georgina goes, that would escalate because I'll be in there thinking I've got this to do, that to do, and so on. So it's about looking for little pockets of rest along the way.
So what might those nanosecond pocket rests look like?
So for me, there is something about the to-do list is always long and life is busy, right? Like I own my own business. I've got 3 kids. We live on a farm. It's always busy. But it's things like I do quite a lot of my thinking in the car because I can't do anything else. I can't send an email. I can't reply to messages. I can't do anything apart from be in the car and drive, right? So my body is occupied enough, and if I can just put on some music that I like, it gives me that creative space, and suddenly I'll get ideas or things will surface, or I'll remember something that I've forgotten or whatever, and it will just allow creative space rather than busyness. So I like being in the car. Now I don't have small children screaming in the back. But so that's kind of a good one for me. I like a bath. So one of the things that I have always struggled with is mindfulness. I cannot do mindfulness. I cannot do let the thoughts come and go. It just doesn't work for me. What I have to do is be busy enough not to think of everything, and that gives me space. So sport is really good for me. I play hockey, and when I'm playing hockey, I can do nothing else apart from think about the match. I need to concentrate on that. So I don't think about the other stuff, and that gives me a break from life because I'm busy enough to keep my brain occupied and away from all the other stuff. And then I get off the pitch and I feel much better. I've done physical exercise, I've got the endorphins rushing, and I've had a break from the noise in my head because all I've thought about is chasing the ball. And so it's things like that. I sew if I get the opportunity. I like sewing because, again, I'm having to concentrate. I can't do it on autopilot. I have to think about what I'm doing, but it gives me a break from all the other stuff. So it might sound weird to other people that I'm just giving myself another thing to do, but it's a thing I enjoy, and it is a thing that gives me something, and it takes me out the other noise in my head temporarily. So micro breaks might look different to everyone. Sometimes it's reading a book because then I'm in the story and I'm not in my real life, and that's enough of a break. Do you know what I mean? It's like it's 20 minutes with a cup of tea in a book because actually I can join in the story, see the characters I like, and just step out of normal, and then I can go back into that.
I love all this. There's such a spectrum there as well. We've gone from hockey to sewing to there's a real mix.
Did I mention I'm good at lots of plates?
You did.
Yeah, so we're talking there about an active rest, aren't we? And I would say I'm similar in terms of activity. So for me, whilst we wouldn't generally conceptualize it as rest, doing Minds Thrive stuff, I get absorbed in that. I get into flow. I love it. And it provides like a little mental holiday for me. But it's also work. And so I recognize for me, I don't do enough that soothes my body. I'm pretty much accelerator full on. And I think for me, if I were to rest better, I've got to figure out how to get my foot off the accelerator and do something a little bit more passive. And I think this is something about the seasons of life. So my children are still quite small, and it is a full-on intense season. There is stuff everywhere. I'm also in the season of having an older mother who has needs and things. So you're juggling so many things. You do get squeezed out. And so my neurodivergent brain, I have to respond to things when it comes into my head, because it might not come back again. Hence the message. So I try and do things automatically. So Ruth was going, did you email Sharon? And I'm like, yes, I emailed Sharon. And then I'm thinking, I definitely had the thoughts of emailing Sharon, and I'm pretty sure I did, but it might just be like Marilyn, Ruth, where I wrote the message, but I don't seem to have sent it, or maybe I sent it to somebody else. That creates a lot of stress.
It does.
And I think having a neurodivergent brain can be really stressful, and you have to work out how to manage it. And you could say, well, Georgina, take some of the things out, but they're all really important to me.
And that's the thing, is like, what do you drop when everything matters is something I come across a lot. Yes. Because like you say, I'm holding all these different things and all these different roles in my life, as I know you guys are too. And sometimes it all gets a lot at once. Like, if things are forming an orderly queue, it's manageable, right? If one thing is particularly stressful but the other one isn't, then it's all good. But when those occasions happen, when it's all a lot, it's really hard to know what to drop. But for me, I think the realization of this is really hard is number one. Number two is I need to do what works for me, not what I think should work for me. You know, I used to get caught up on, well, I should be doing it this way because that's the general accepted way of doing something. Whereas actually, I know that this way would work for me better. And actually, it's okay to do that, not the way that everyone else expects you to do it, or the world expects you to do it. Or, yeah, I think for me, there's, you know, you've got to do what works for your head. So if it's responding to messages instantly, then that works, right? But then if it's for other people, it might be making lists or, you know, whatever. But rather than thinking, oh, I probably ought to do it that way, just do it the way that works for you in your brain, because everyone is different, as we know. And even two people with ADHD may have completely different struggles because they're different people, and it could be combined with other people in their lives or different elements, you know. So it's just giving yourself permission to trust your gut and go with what works for you.
Going on a slight tangent, Sharon, have you noticed that all your closest friends are quite neurodivergent, like Ruth?
Some of them might be listening, so I need to be careful what I say. But yes, I think there's that element of, you know, when you get people you just click
Find
with.
your tribe.
Yes.
I know, right? And when you go through that neurocurious phase, you kind of go, well, I can't be that different because they're like that, and that they're like that, and they're like that, and then you go, oh. Yeah, that might be why we get on so well.
Yeah, it is. So I need lots of different people in my life. I need my tribe where we get each other and we're all sort of dropping balls, and it's like, oh, thank goodness it's not just me. But I also need my mother's friends who are always on it and can say, yes, Georgina, the carol service is at the church this time.
but that's it. It's surrounding people. It's surrounding yourself with people that work for you, right? And there's
Yeah.
certain people that don't work for me, and I've learned that, and I've stopped trying so hard to make it work, because actually it's okay to go, you're just not the right person to have. I can still have a conversation with you and be friendly with you, but I don't need to have you in my inner circle because you stress me out, or whatever the reason is. It's okay to actually recognize that some people you'll really click with and some people you won't, and there's reasons for that, and actually to keep the people that really help and you help, and the others can just take that ring step backwards, so that they're not quite in the inner circle, they're in the next one out.
I love that. Well, we're talking here about connection, and connection is so important to mental health, isn't it? And having that
Yep.
safe inner circle where people get us, people accept us, people celebrate us, and then we have ever increasing circles of people on the outside, all of which you play a role. And I think we can navigate life much more easily if we're kind to ourselves, and we've got a few people in our lives who will be kind to us too.
But I'm aware as well that I'm speaking from a place of self-employment. I think it's really difficult, and I work with a lot of people who struggle in the workplace because of, in a large corporate environment, for example, they don't get to pick and choose who's in their immediate vicinity and who's in their team, and who they choose to put in a circle slightly further away. It's forced upon them, and therefore that can be really challenging, because you're going to get people who don't get you, and because the default belief can be, there must be something wrong with me, I need to be different. That can have a spiral effect on mental health.
Yeah. I wonder if there's something in what you're saying here that circles back round to your insights that you had with your husband that might be helpful when we're in situations. I mean, I'm not saying that you're in this situation with your husband, I'm talking about the work people where you're with people that you're struggling to get on with. But you were talking about a conflict where you didn't get
Yeah.
each other. And
Yeah.
I guess the hope, if I was going to put hope into the situation in my annoying optimist way, it would be that what you found was by deepening your understanding of the other person, deepening your understanding of yourself in really empathetic ways, that kind of he's doing something that's absolutely opposed to you, leaving the milk out, where you'll be like, why can't you just put it away? But actually, by understanding that it's not a malevolent attack on you, it's his brain is sort of bouncing off onto something else. So I wonder, for the hope that I would sow is that if it's psychologically safe enough, or if workplaces can feed into places being more psychologically safe, that conversations can be had where we recognise the differences. Because with differences comes, I think, strength, where we can build something stronger. So the differences between you and your husband, I remember somebody saying once, the strength of a temple is that the pillars stand apart. So what you don't want to marry is your identical twin who works in exactly the same way as you. And the fact that you're slightly different and stand apart makes a very strong structure, which I believe feeds very well into creating good, solid family environments.
I think that's
Workplace.
really interesting. Well, so from a kind of corporate perspective, I work with a lot of people who are struggling within their corporate structure. And so what I'm working on with them is that self-understanding bit, that self-compassion bit, that kind of validation that it's okay to sort of be able to identify firstly, and then talk about what it is that would help you or what hinders you. I think there's some poor managers out there that are not very good at hearing that feedback, or accommodating that feedback. So my optimism hope would be that we get better management structure that allows people to be able to say, look, it's not that I don't want to do the work, but actually if I do the work in this way, it will be done more productively and with less stress for everyone. So there's that accommodation there, and it's recognizing that being inclusive to those who struggle with some element of neurodiversity doesn't mean excluding neurotypical. Like, it can be something that includes everybody and works for everybody and allows people enough flexibility. Obviously, there has to be boundaries and there has to be expectations and structure within corporate business, but allowing a degree of flexibility within those parameters allows everyone to thrive, and that makes the team better and that makes the business better and stuff like that. I think it's really interesting when we get to farming, which obviously I've been talking a lot about, because neurodiversity is prevalent in agriculture, and very often you'll get either family members, for example, father and son, or you'll get boss and farm worker, which may both be neurodiverse but in different ways, but may not be aware that they are yet, because it's still a very new conversation and there's a lack of understanding. But it's just helping people have those conversations that are less accusatory and more sort of cooperative, and just saying, look, I've noticed that you never seem to turn up on work on time, rather than going, you've got to be here on time or I'm firing you, going, how can we make that easier for you? Like, is there anything we can do? What is it like? I mean, it might be that they're just lazy, not getting out of bed, or it might be that they struggle with timekeeping and they have time blindness. So let's look at how we can help them with that. Do you know what I mean? And it's finding out whether it's what you fear it is or whether there's something you can do about it. And it's a challenge, but it's possible, and it's actually not that difficult to be curious and open, but there needs to be, like you say, that safety.
I think something that you probably do, just like listening to what you're doing in terms of the therapy that you provide for people. So correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like there's something about you helping people find the right language to use. And that kind of comes from like a personal reflection of, again, I'm not diagnosed, so people who are diagnosed might not be happy with that, but there isn't an ADHD box I don't tick. And dyslexia, yeah, you just need to have a look at my writing to recognise what's going on there. But something that I didn't know about dyslexia was it's not just the struggle with spelling and the struggle with reading, but it's also about processing, which perhaps links into ADHD as well. And so my own personal journey has been to recognise that when there's lots of noise going on, I can't speak. There's something, it closes down. It's like I can only do, I'm a single track processor. So if you've got the TV on and then somebody's listening to something on an iPad, you cannot hold a conversation with me. That is just too much. And previously I was never able to articulate that. I would just be like, somebody would ask me something and I'd be like not able to answer, and I didn't know what it was, why it was, or how to articulate it now. And although it's much later on, my poor husband is like, well, what, you always used to be able to cope. And I was like, I don't think I did. I just wasn't able to express it. Whereas now I can say, oh, if we want a conversation, off. Okay, you've got my full attention. He knows to pause the telly to speak to me. So, but
that's the thing, and it is a lot about communication in terms of, but the first bit of that is identification. You need to understand it to have the language to express it to someone else. You need to kind of make sense of it in your own head before you can offer it out to someone else. Or maybe that's just me, but I do a lot of that with people. So it's kind of working out exactly what it is they need. They know they can't do something, but actually it's helping them identify, by giving them space and time to actually think about it and try out different things, what it is that would actually benefit them, whether it's pausing the TV or whatever it is. And I think the other thing that jumped out at me, and you're a bit younger than me, so it's not probably an issue for you, but one of the things that I used to really beat myself up about was, why can't I do this stuff? I used to be able to do this stuff all the time. And that's partly the hormone changes and the perimenopausal brain. And a lot of the other women that I speak to who are perimenopausal and neurodiverse, and kind of it's all kicking off in their head. The biggest thing is, but I used to be able to do this and now I can't do this. Like, what's going on? Like, how come I'm failing? And that's a massive thing in the workplace, because people who are perfectly competent at their job are now leaving the workforce because they think they can't do it anymore, or they think that or management think they can't do it anymore. And actually it's not that they can't do the job, it's just that something's shifted and they need a bit more support with it, but they actually still can do the job. And so we've got women leaving the workforce in their late 40s, early 50s, because they think they're not quite so on the ball anymore. But not all of that. Like, yeah, it's just complicated, right? And actually a bit more understanding about that and ability to communicate what's needed again would have a massive impact.
Yeah, the word seasons has come back up into my head. Georgina mentioned she's in a season of, and then there's different seasons in our life, and so what works in one season might not work in the next. I mean, my goodness, farming, you guys know about seasons.
Yeah,
what you need to be doing in one to the other. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think generally as women, and that is a massive generalization, but we're expected to evolve more through the stages of our life. And so our identity changes, particularly those who have a family, you know, they're expected to change their identity more frequently throughout life than maybe men are. So we're better at it, but we're not very good at necessarily asking for what we need because it's just written off as, oh well, it's just a thing, right?
Sharon, I could talk to you all day. It's been absolutely fascinating, and we've kind of had a really broad discussion, haven't we? We've talked about getting diagnosed later in life, understanding ourselves, having compassion towards our own neurodiversity, irrespective of having a diagnosis. We've explored parenting in the context of being neurodivergent. And I loved our reflection on pacing and giving ourselves nano breaks. And I think your reflections helped me to understand a little bit more compassionately myself, actually, the additional pressures that we can face as neurodivergent parents, and recognizing that and making accommodations for that rather than condemning ourselves for it. And Ruth, what else have we talked about? We've said a lot, haven't we?
We have. I don't know. I was impressed you could remember it all, Georgina. My brain doesn't hold stuff in that way. So there you go. Neurodiversity in action.